Welcome along. This is a short and sharp module on controlling changes to a project and how to do that effectively. Just to be clear, it's not about change management, although the terms are often used interchangeably, but it's important to get the terms right. When I use the term change management, generally what I'm saying is putting in place processes, tools, and techniques to deal with any changes the project may bring about, changes in people's behavior, or changes in user behavior, and fully embedding those changes. And that's a separate module on change management. And all project managers should be aware of and competent in change management. This module is about controlling change requests to the project, people asking for changes to the scope or the deliverable or the budget. It's about controlling those changes in an appropriate manner. So my goal here at the end of the session is that you've understood why you've got to have prompt identification and documentation of all changes, and that you've got a defined process for assessing those and making any decisions made, putting them back into the project and checking that they're being done. And our ultimate goal here is no surprises. Okay, so we want everything documented and controlled and tracked, so we know exactly what it is that we're supposed to be doing on the project. Unfortunately, the real world out there is that a lot of projects don't do change control very well at all. I'm just going to clear all that drawing away. That's right. Change control is usually done. Change control is usually done very poorly, with a lot of changes being done verbally or with half documentation or with no delegated authority to the project manager, and it all just gets caught up in a massive ball of process. But we know that having an appropriate change control process does contribute to the chance of project success. So that's what we want you to do. Okay, so it's going to be a delicate balancing act between too much and too little, but most people it's too little. Okay, so you don't want to have too much process that doesn't add benefit to the project, but in my experience, most people either avoid or ignore the processes that they're supposed to follow, or just do not have the processes in place. So that's what we want you to achieve at the end of this. Now, the key messages here, and again, this is a very short module, is that you should always have some sort of documented and appropriate change control process. It should be part of your particular project management methodology or methodologies. It should be a clear part of it on how change requests are documented, who can raise them, who can approve them, what's the approval process, how you record them all, like with a change register. That should all be part of it. And what's really important is a project manager should have a delegated authority, an appropriate level of delegated authority, to make sure that projects aren't held up with small changes. I've certainly seen instances where project managers have no delegated authority, which means that every change needs to go to some sort of change control board or steering committee or steering group. And that's just not effective. It's not efficient use of anybody's time as well. So you want to make sure that project managers have some level of appropriate delegated authority based on their experience and their competency. And that delegated authority should allow them to consider whether or not a change request should be approved or declined. And it should enable them to get the resources they need when they need them, rather than arguing with a functional manager. But the key message here is there's not often in these modules that I say all or 100% of the time. Hopefully you're picking up that a lot of project management is choosing what's right for you and applying it appropriately. But unfortunately, in this instance, I'm going to insist that every project has a way of controlling all requested changes, and they must all be documented and controlled, no matter how small or obviously large they are. Every single change request. But as we'll see, we want that to be appropriate. We don't want a small change request that can be handled in that minute to have to go through a large 3-page document that then has to wait for the next change control board to meet in 2 weeks' time. That small change that was requested verbally over a coffee should be able to be dealt with by a simple email exchange and then updating the change register in any documents as well. But the point is, all changes must be documented. What we're trying to do here is avoid death by 1,000 cuts and scope creep and gold plating. We covered scope creep in the defining a project scope module, but it's worth repeating just really quickly here. Scope creep is undocumented changes to a project. It's not changes to a project, because I've had one person tell me, well, scope creep just means any changes. Change happens. Change is normal on a project, absolutely. Scope creep is undocumented. You know, those verbal handshakes and agreements that 6 months down the track everybody disagrees with because you agreed by it verbally. Scope creep should be documented, or scope changes should be documented to avoid scope creep. Gold plating is just sort of the inverse of that. It's you deciding that you can add extra functionality to a client's deliverable, and you do it without asking them. You gold plate the deliverable, and then you find out that they didn't want it that way anyway. And I've seen that with a software project that was upgraded because new technology became available, handed over to the client, and the client said, well, if you'd asked us, we would have told you that our hardware can't support that functionality. The point here is always talk, always be open, always get agreement, and always document all of your changes. So we're actually going to deal with this module just by looking at a horrible diagram, to be honest. This is a simple diagram I did, and you can tell that. I don't think I need to explain that to you, just using shapes. But it's actually based on one that I saw at an organization. I was working as a consultant for a large organization, and their offices were in just a normal high story or skyscraper type of building. I just remember that by the time I got out of the lift on the floor that they were on, this poster, a poster showing something very similar to this but a lot better designed, was right in front of me. And by the time I got the desk I was working at for that day, I'd seen this poster 3 times, which clearly outlined their change control process. What a fantastic way to let people know how changes are managed on your projects. They also had other posters up around the office too, other aspects of project initiation or project closure, project documentation, where you could find the project management methodologies, where the PMO was. It was a great way to actually communicate. So I took this and dumbed it down quite a bit. This is a sample change control process and a simple change control process too. So let's go through it and the steps in it. So first up, somebody asks for a change or the need for the change is identified. It happens all the time in projects, by the way. Get used to it. Don't fight it. I know a lot of people who go, no, projects should never change. Once you've planned what you're going to do, that's what you do. No, well, that's just fantasy land, frankly. Changes are going to come across, so the potential change is identified. Now, the important thing here is it is the project manager always that takes responsibility for documenting it according to the change control process. And I'll show you an example in a moment. The project manager documents it in the appropriate way. Then they can make the decision, is the request to change within their delegated authority or not? If it is within their delegated authority level, and remember they've got to have some, the project manager can either choose to approve or decline the change request. Thumbs up or thumbs down. And then whatever they do, they go and update the relevant project documents, the change register, whatever the change impacts, whether it's the scope, the time, the resources, and they update them all and make everybody aware of any changes. If the project manager decides that it's outside of their delegated authority, and this should be very clear if it is or isn't, it then goes to the appropriate group of people, the senior managers, the project steering committee, the steering group, the change control board, the governance group, whatever that is that they're called. It goes to them with all the necessary information and recommendations from the project manager. They can then either approve or decline the change request. But regardless of what they choose to do, again, it's up to the project manager to update all the relevant project documents and communicate the changes to people. So that's a very simple change control process, but it works well. Feel free to use it as the basis of your very own poster. Maybe I'll come into your offices one day and see a poster up explaining change control processes as well. So let's take a closer look at that, because in addition to having a simple graphical representation, you should have some clear description of the steps in that. So here's just a little more detail here on a similar change control process. So obviously here, the first stage is the identification of the change, where any stakeholder can ask for a change. Doesn't mean they're getting it, but they can request it. Okay. They'll put it onto a change request form, and you'll be able to show them what they have to download or where on the internet or the app that your software that you're using that they can request it. They'll have to put in a description of the change, the reasons for the change, the impact on cost and time and resources. And the project manager takes responsibility for making sure this is all filled out. Then the project manager always is the first stop in assessing the change, like has it got merit or not. So that'll be the initial review. Then there's a detailed analysis. Again, the project manager takes responsibility for completing this. This is just double checking on the information. Is it valid? Has the assessment of impact been done correctly? They'll check with other affected stakeholders to see whether they want it or not. Then obviously, if this one here is going to go through to the change control board and it's outside of the delegated authority level of the project manager, it goes off to the change control board in this case. And it goes with all the key information that they need. A write-up from the project manager may require more information than what's in the change request form. And then the change control board can make the decision, approve or decline it. And the project manager then takes responsibility for updating all communication and documentation to make sure everybody's aware of it. And checks that it's done or not done, as we'll see in a moment. So that's the extra sort of level of information you can have instead of just that plain old graphical diagram for your change control process. And again, the key points are just letting people know exactly this is how we manage change on our project. This is an example from the case study we're using throughout all of these modules of a simple community library project. And you are able to download all of these forms, by the way. Just look for those and you can download all of these forms for that particular example. Here you'll see this is the change control process for this particular project. There's the purpose of the change control process. Well, it's the aims to minimize the impact of changes and document them appropriately. There's a description of the process overview through the different steps. The initial review, the detailed analysis, same sorts of things. It's all there where people can find this easily on the intranet. And then in this case, the change control board is the sole authority for approving or declining change requests. I probably need to rewrite that to include delegated authority to the project manager. So that's, again, generic and nice and simple, but it should be part of your project management plan, that comprehensive collection of all your planning documents. Your change control process will be in there. It'll be easy to find. You'll keep it updated, make sure it's appropriate and serving the project as well. Now, here's a bit of magic for you, having a change register. Now, lots of software does this for you. Lots of the project management software collects all the changes, assigns them number, but at a minimum, you want an Excel spreadsheet or even a Word table running. This is some of the information at a minimum that you want on it. You want each change request to have its own unique identifying number. So change number 23, 24, 25, 26, 27, all the way up to change number, I don't know, 900. Hopefully you don't get that many changes to a project. That would be a bit ridiculous. I think the most I've ever had on a project was probably something like 120 changes, but that was on a 2-year project. Yeah, that seemed about right at the time. You'll have some description of the change, either high level or detailed description of the change. You might have an assessment of the impact on a scale of 1 to 5 here. 1 is a very minor change, 5 massive change. Maybe you have to go back to the client, restart the contract, change the project charter. And then you've got other information you need to. You can have the decision or where it's at in the process. This one's still in process. This one's approved, declined, approved, approved. You can have other information like hyperlinks to different documents, like the change request document, the meeting minutes, the email. If it's a simple change being handled by email, you may have a hyperlink here to the saved email, so it's all there. And then you'll also have, did somebody check it? Now, this makes sense to you. If you've approved, in this case, changing the color of the steel and it was approved, you want somebody to go and check that somebody changed the color of the steel. Look at this one, change number 25. It was declined. Somebody still needed to go check that the work wasn't done. Now that's an interesting concept, but I've seen a project firsthand where a change request came through. The team just assumed that it would be approved and they started doing the work. It went to the change control board who actually declined it. Now the team didn't bother to check and the project manager just assumed everybody would know. So the team actually did the work and it caused a massive fuss when the client said they requested this but understood it wasn't going to be done. Why was it still there? Because they'd now made plans to be without it. So even if something is declined, go and make sure that the work wasn't done accidentally in anticipation of approval. So you should have a change register. As I said, your project management software will probably do it. or at least Excel will do it for you as well. And here's just a very generic, again, just horribly generic example of a change control template and the sort of information that might be in it. If you're using software, it'll have its own fields of information, but most of these should be in there somewhere. So obviously we've got our identifying information up here, the name of the project, who was prepared by, date, who's requesting the change, and also the change number. That's back to that change register, change number 24, 25, 26, etc. What's the type of change? Is it to do with the scope, procurement, budget, schedule? What else? A detailed description of the change, the reason for the change, what's the effect on cost and time, or could be effect on risk or anything else, and clearly describe it. So you want enough information in this document that the decision makers can make their decision. And here's the approval here, or it should be like approve, decline. Again, I write like a child with these annotated things, and the date. So that's just a very generic change control template, just to tell you what sort of things should be in your change control template. So have a think now. As I said, this is a very short module, very high level module. So I want you to have a think about, right, first up, do you already have a change control process? Is it appropriate? Like, is it actually serving the project and allowing changes to be considered in an appropriate time frame, fully documented? Do you need to change it? Do you need to increase delegated authority levels to your project manager? Do you need several different levels of template, one for small changes, one for medium changes, one for large changes? So start to think about those things now, about what you need for your change control process. So as I promised, this is a very short section, and the key messages there are all changes on a project must be documented according to your pre-agreed and documented change control process, which should be part of your project management methodology. And it should be appropriate. It should help your project. The project manager should have appropriate levels of delegated authority to be able to approve or decline changes without having to refer every change to some centralized board, steering committee, or change control board, etc. But again, and I want to stress this, don't let scope creep happen with undocumented changes. All changes, I'll circle that again and 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 again, just making it disappear. And once more for effect, all changes on a project must be documented and checked. So that's how you avoid scope creep. That's how you have complete transparency. That's how you get complete agreement on what's being done and not done. And that's how you deal with that progressive elaboration and the iterations to any project, is documenting all of the changes. So that's my challenge to you. Take some time now to develop a checklist of the tools and techniques you would like in your change control process, either to develop one or to improve the one that you've already got. Drop me a line if you've got any questions, because as with all of these modules, the short ones and the long ones, if you do have any questions, you can email me or message me, and I'll endeavour to answer your questions as fast as possible. But thank you so much for your time. I'm grateful for it. And yeah, have a great rest of the day. Bye-bye.